much hope.
You don't have hope? Why not?
Trying to, but the same thing keeps happening where there's just no justice.
We need the guilty verdict. We need reform. We need new policies pushed forward. We need many things.
So the verdict in the trial is just one part of it?
That's just one part. That's nowhere near the tip of the iceberg for what we're actually standing out here for. Like, this goes way far back.
So while maybe the process works for me, someone who looks like me, it doesn't work for everybody.
Is that a concern for you as we start this trial?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Welcome back to the Sunday Show. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Jury selection is set to begin tomorrow in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, who is charged with murder in the death of George Floyd last May. Chauvin is facing charges of second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter for kneeling on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes as he repeatedly cried, "I can't breathe." There's still some uncertainty surrounding the trial, with the Minnesota Court of Appeals ruling on Friday that the trial court must reconsider the prosecutor's request to add a third-degree murder charge against Chauvin, a ruling that could delay the proceedings. Meanwhile, the national outcry over Floyd's death is slowly materializing into real change. On Wednesday, the House passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, an expansive police reform bill which would ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants, prohibit racial profiling, and overhaul qualified immunity for police officers. Joining me now, the lead author of that bill, Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. Congresswoman Bass, thank you for being on the Sunday Show.
Sure.
You wrote an op-ed in USA Today where you wrote this: the House passed the police reform bill 30 years to the day of Rodney King's brutal beating. You also write, when the police officers in the Rodney King case were acquitted, I felt hopeless and defeated. That's how we will continue to feel until we act.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, after Rodney King, I thought for sure the world would see what black communities, brown communities had been talking about for generations. And when that verdict came down, absolutely, it was like, well, that wasn't enough. And since then, I mean, we have seen hundreds of videos of people either being brutalized or killed. And so I think that George Floyd's murder was so egregious. The hundreds of thousands of people out in every state in the country certainly provided the momentum for us to pass the bill last year.
And so the provisions in the bill I talked about in the intro, federal ban of chokeholds, we get that. Prohibiting no-knock warrants, that's what killed Breonna Taylor. Outlaws racial profiling, we all get that. Here's the one thing I want to ask you about, and that is overhauling qualified immunity for officers. What is it? And why is it important to overhaul it, if not just get rid of it completely?
Sure, and it's actually two provisions. It's qualified immunity, and it's also lowering the standard from which you can prosecute an officer. But qualified immunity essentially allows an individual to sue the officer. And right now, the officer has immunity from that. If you remember when Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck, he had his hand in his pocket. He was looking at the camera because I guess he felt he could kill him on camera with complete impunity. And so to get rid of that, having the officer being liable is something that is important to hold officers accountable, because right now there's really no way to hold them accountable, which is why we keep seeing the same thing over and over and over again.
Congressman, what do you say to Republicans who push back on your push to get rid of or overhaul qualified immunity and say that, one, that is anti-cop, and two, that is just going to make it open season on police officers to, quote-unquote, frivolous lawsuits?
Well, I mean, I think it's similar to any other profession. If you behave recklessly, if you cause harm, then why would it be surprised that you would be held civically liable? And in terms of reducing the way you prosecute an officer, right now, time after time, officers are arrested and then charges are dropped or charges are not filed. This just happened in Rochester, New York. The officers that put the spit hood over the man and he died, and charges were not filed. And so we have to do something to hold officers accountable. So the two provisions in the bill that do that is qualified immunity and reducing the standard from which to prosecute from willful to reckless. So rather than trying to determine whether the officer was really thinking that that day he was going to kill George Floyd, then he was reckless when he did it. And with qualified immunity, in order to sue, you have to essentially prove that there is another case with the exact same circumstances. So with George Floyd, you have to find another case with an officer that did the exact same thing that would allow you to bring about a suit. That's a ridiculous standard, and it needs to change. And by the way, there are plenty of Republicans who actually believe qualified immunity should be eliminated altogether. The Koch brothers, the Cato Institute. So it's not unanimous that all Republicans believe that qualified immunity should stay in place.
And Congresswoman Bass, last question on this. Great, there are Republicans who support overhauling, getting rid of qualified immunity. Are any of them in the Senate? What are your hopes for passage of your bill, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, in the Senate? Can it get through the Senate? What do you tell Republicans to get them to vote for it?
Well, so first of all, you know, anytime a bill passes the House and goes to the Senate, you know it's not a surprise if changes are made. And I do believe that there is the sentiment there. I do believe that we're going to be able to do this. Senator Tim Scott has been working with us, and I believe that we will get a bill on President Biden's desk.
All right. Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Joining me now to discuss, Philip Atiba Goff, co-founder and CEO of the Center for Policing Equity. Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor, MSNBC legal analyst, and host of the Justice Matters podcast. Back with me, Midwin Charles, civil trial and criminal defense attorney. Okay, you all, the prospects of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act actually passing out of the Senate. And why is it important that it does? Philip, you go first.
Yeah, so if it can get to the floor and if it can get a full vote, it would be landmark legislation in terms of reforming policing. There's a lot in there. I mean, you had the list in there. There are also things in there that are not getting as much attention that I hope that we pay attention to afterwards, like forbidding people who are arresting someone from having sex with them, which in some places is still legal for some reason. It would be incredible to have all of the things that activists who have been working in the reform space have been asking for on the record, right? Having that out there. So that's a good first step. But it's also necessary to get that there so that everything else that the people you were showing in Minneapolis are asking for post the Chauvin trial, all of the resources to make sure that folks don't have to call 911 in the first place, that's what comes next. And to get there, for a lot of folks, we need to get this bill done and on the books.
And Glenn, as you talk about your view of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, I would love your thoughts on ending qualified immunity.
Yeah, you know, Jonathan, for too long, I think officers who are determined to violate the rules, who are determined to violate the civil rights of the citizens they're supposed to be protecting and serving, have gotten away with far too much. It's almost trite that we say that. We say it over and over and over again. And I think the act hopefully will pass, and I think it's a great first step. I hope there's a second step, and I hope there's a third step, because part of my concern, Jonathan, is you can ban excessive force. So, for example, you can ban chokeholds, and that's an excellent first step. However, if there are police officers who have hate or prejudice in their heart and they bring that with them out onto the street when they're policing, then do we really think they're going to obey a new prohibition against a chokehold that is designed to protect the citizens? I'm not so sure. So I'm hoping there are second steps and third steps that will involve extreme vetting with full citizen participation of people who want to become police officers. They want to put the badge on the chest, the gun on the hip, and order us out of our cars and onto the ground. Then we and the citizens you will police want to extremely vet you to make sure that when we ban chokeholds, you will obey that ban.
Midwin, as the Derek Chauvin trial gets underway tomorrow, and we should be clear that it's not the trial, meaning jury selection, starts tomorrow. How likely is it that he's going to get a fair trial, considering it is being held there in Minneapolis, all the notoriety? Should anyone be concerned about the prospects of a fair trial for him?
Well, I'm sure his defense team would be greatly concerned about whether or not he could get a fair trial, because this case and the video really just went around the world. As we all know, after George Floyd was killed, it sparked protests throughout the country in every single state, as well as internationally. But, you know, the process of voir dire, which in Latin just basically means to tell the truth, is where the prosecutor and the defense attorney start to ask the potential jury pool questions to see whether they are suitable to serve on the jury. We all have our biases, and we all come to the table with lived experiences that inform how it is that we decide certain cases and facts. But what the attorneys are supposed to do is ensure and ask the potential jurors whether or not they can set aside their biases and their prejudices and keep an open mind throughout the trial. Can they listen to the evidence? Can they listen to the witnesses and not form an opinion until the very end of the trial? So that's what we're going to be seeing in the next day or two when the trial opens up. You're going to see the attorneys ask those questions and try to form a jury that is one that could deliver a verdict that they want, right? If you're on the defense team, you want your client exonerated. And if you're on the prosecution, you want a conviction. Now, I do want to point out that in the state of Minnesota, as well as in Minneapolis, in the same police department, the prosecutors were able to succeed in get a guilty conviction for police officer Mohammed Noor. And I have to point out that Officer Mohammed Noor was Black, and he was charged with killing a white woman. He was found guilty of third-degree murder, and he has been sentenced to 10.5 years. Her family, her estate, was able to get a settlement on a wrongful death case for $20 million. We have not seen any Black person killed by police get anywhere near that amount of a settlement. So there is precedent, not a lot, but there is precedent for police officers being found guilty of this. But I want to point out that that precedent exists in the same police department for a Black police officer killing a white woman. You can't divorce those facts from this particular case.
And, you know, to that point, Midwin, even in Minneapolis, though, there is skepticism, cynicism, but skepticism that there will be a guilty verdict. Have a listen to what one of the protesters in Minneapolis had to say on this point.
If they're going to find him guilty, why are we putting barbed wire around buildings? They're doing that to keep us out if it does come out that he's innocent.
There's no reason to put barbed wire or blocks and cinder blocks around public property if you think the decision that's going to come from it is going to be aligned for Black people and for Black people.
And you know, Philip, I mean, the jury selection hasn't even begun, but people in Minneapolis are viewing what's happening around that courthouse as a de facto decision that Derek Chauvin is going to walk from this.
Yeah, well, the conversation that we've been having and that's going to happen in lots of broadcast media and print media is going to be about the sort of details of the trial, as if we have erected a system that routinely delivers justice for Black folks, right, when somebody is unlawfully killed by the state. But that's just not the case, right? So what you're hearing from folks in the communities around Minneapolis and in Black communities around the country and around the globe is a recognition that the systems that we've got in place were not set up to deliver justice for us. So, yeah, it's important that we try and do this the right way. We try and do it within the systems that we've got. It's important that we reform the systems we've got so that they can deliver justice. But let's not lie and imagine that, well, this is just a set of unfortunate accidents, and all we've got to do is tinker with the system, and then it'll work the way it was always intended to. It's been working the way it's intended to for for generations. And so the skepticism that you hear from black folks in Minneapolis and across the globe is a recognition of that fact. And we shouldn't elide over it just because we have some hope that there will be good people working in flawed systems to try and deliver something better than what we've gotten before. Right. You know, I mean, I look at that settlement figure, $20 million, and then I think about Alton Sterling's family that was just given 4.5. Right after having been offered 5, and they said we want more justice. That's a difficult thing to come back from and learn to trust the system in place.
And Glenn, we've got less than actually 30 seconds left, but your final thoughts.
So final thoughts, I'm looking for a few things. One, because we know the trial court judge dismissed the third-degree murder charge, and the appellate court overturned that. We're going to have to wrestle with that issue. That could actually result in a delay if one party or another seeks to appeal that. And then the final thought, Jonathan, is here's a dark horse, is that in Minnesota, under the laws of Minnesota, you as a defendant can waive your right to a jury trial. And I bet Chauvin's attorney has been thinking long and hard about whether he would rather have a dispassionate judge who is less likely, in theory, to be swayed by the emotion of the case. And the emotion of this case is considerable, and go with a bench trial instead of a jury trial. I think that's something we'll maybe hear about in the coming days.
In the coming days, your gut, what does your gut tell you, Glenn?
Guilty.
No, but will he go bench trial or jury trial?
Oh, sorry. I kind of jumped to the end result that I think is warranted by the evidence I see as a 30-year career prosecutor, homicide prosecutor, somebody who has prosecuted both cop killers and killer cops. If I were the defense, I would waive my right to a jury trial because I think the emotions will run high, and all of those emotions will be in favor of George Floyd.
And with that, we're going to have to leave it there. Philippa T. Begoff, Glenn Kirshner, thank you very much for coming on the show. Midwin, you're coming back later. Coming up, I have an amazing panel here to debunk the angry black woman stereotype. Stay with us.
Forget what your smoking hot moms and teachers say. Just remember my motto. If you ain't first, you're last. Woo-hoo!
Did you know Prilosec OTC can stop frequent heartburn before it begins? Heartburn happens when stomach acid refluxes into the esophagus. Prilosec OTC uses a unique delayed release form